Okay, let's talk about the pest of the hive. The Varroa mite's probably the big bugaboo with bees these days, like I mentioned earlier, but there's also a few others, like I talked about the wax moths and the hive beetles, but those aren't going to cause you to lose your bees normally. The thing that's going to cause you to lose your bees if you're not treating for mites is the viruses that the mites cause. Mites are much like a tick that would get on your dog or cat, and they're going to cause the bee some irritation, and they're not necessarily comfortable for the bee, but they're not going to kill your bee. What's going to happen is if their numbers are large enough, they're going to cause viruses and spread their viral loads, and your colony is going to dwindle and become weak based on the fact that it weakens their immune system, it knocks them back, and it puts them in such a stress that they can't perform and they can't function properly. And next thing you know, your colony will collapse. What do we do about mites? Well, there's several treatment methods out there. There's a few that have been outlawed because they no longer function properly. The real problem with that is not so much the chemical that was the makeup of the treatment, but the beekeepers. Beekeeping is a huge industry. I don't know if you realize it or not, but there are some beekeepers out there that have 30, 40, 50,000 colonies. I've personally met a couple that have upwards of 20,000 colonies, and they're great guys, and they care about their bees just as much as somebody that has one or two colonies. The thing is, they have a huge, huge workload. One of the guys, he lost approximately half of his 20,000 colonies one year, but he was able to rebuild. How? By making splits in the spring and by making more queens and rebuilding. But it was a huge, 13,000 colonies was what he told me he lost one year. And it was due to the Varroa mites. Very expensive lesson he learned. He was of the opinion that, the bees should be able to handle it and take care of themselves. He has some good genetics. He has some of the most gentle bees. In fact, I like his queens. His Italians are so sweet you don't need to dress up to work them, unless you do some really heavy banging or really make them mad. They're pretty sweet bees. But the point is, if you're not checking for mites, you don't know whether you need to treat for mites. Some guys just treat anyway, and some guys, what happened with some of the chemicals, Coumaphos was one of them, that it wore out. Its efficacy became null and void based on the fact that the mites became immune to it. Much like some of the pesticide companies, when they treat the hotels and apartments and such for rodents or roaches or whatever, they have to switch their treatments practically every month to keep the roaches or whatever they're treating from building up an immunity to it. And they call it, in the bee world, they call it breeding for resistant mites if you're treating with the same thing over and over again. There's a couple of products out there. One of them is a chemical called Apivar. The chemical is actually called Amitraz, but the label of it is Apivar. This is what it looks like. This is a 50 pack. You probably won't need that. We sell these in 10 packs. This will treat several hives, up to 5 or 6 hives, depending on how big, what size they are. This is like $35. It's very good insurance for your bees' health. How do you know if you need to treat? Well, I know based on experience that a colony will go about 3 months between treatments before they build up enough to become a problem where you need to treat again. Is that always the case? No, that's not a hard number. That's a round number that is very, very flexible. In other words, you may have a mite problem one day, you treat, you get your mite level under control, and if your neighbor has a mite problem and he's not treating, or there's a wild beehive under a shed somewhere or in a tree somewhere, and they start to collapse due to mite problems, those bees abandon ship. They have to leave. There's no reason to stay in that colony, in that tree anymore, and they start looking for a place to go, and it's what you call mite drift. Mite bomb drift is very common. In fact, Randy Oliver has done a lot of research about the drift of mites. They even took little magnetic strips and glued them to the backs of bees and color coded them, and just to see how far they would actually drift. They did it on mite loaded down colonies that they knew were mite bombs, and just to see how a fresh colony that had 0 mites, was a mile away or half a mile away, they did them in different intervals of distance to find out how fast a colony gets infested with mites when somebody in the neighborhood is not treating. The point is, please treat for mites. Please don't be a mite bomb. If you do, let me know where your bees are so I won't put any of mine in your area. I'm saying that kind of jokingly, but the truth of the matter is you can be a problem if you're not treating for mites to the rest of the bee community. A lot of the commercial guys just really, really don't like to be around backyard or hobbyist beekeepers, because there's a lot of hobbyist beekeepers that don't think they need to treat for mites. There's a camp out there that wants to be treatment free. In fact, there's 2 camps out there that want to be treatment free, and I'm in one of those camps because I want to breed for mite resistant queens and genetics that don't require treatment, but we're not there yet. As a community, we're still working on that. There's some really great work going on in some of the bee labs. LSU has some great work going on. We actually have some of their genetics in our lines, and we actually sell some queens and use some queens from the LSU genetics. It's a fantastic research program, and they've come a long way, but they're just not quite there yet across the board, so to speak. There's some folks that claim that they're treatment free, and I don't doubt that, but I haven't seen results of my own eyes, so I still try to breed. In fact, our own Texan line of bees are more mite resistant than some of the more gentle bees, but they're a little more aggressive to work. They're a little bit more of a defensive bee, so they require me to put on my gloves and veil to work in the summertime. And while I can get by with wearing these types of gloves, in fact, we found these white ones work really good. The blue ones, the bees may, they're a little darker. The bees may notice them a little bit more, but I can wear these with my jacket. I don't even have to use those gauntlet gloves. In fact, I would suggest getting some of these when when they start selling them again. I get them on Amazon. I used to get them $20 for 100 of them. Now you can't get them anymore, but I've still got a few packages that I've had around. But something like this is all you need to work most of your bees with. But of course, you want to use this anytime you're handling the mite chemicals. These are chemicals. Always go by the label. Do never ignore the label. And they change. Check it every year. This label might change next year. It might require a different time period to leave them on, take them off, according to what the current research is. Right now, these you put them in. They're a mite strip. They hang between 2 of the frames, and you leave them for 14 days. You put 2 in the brood nest. If you have a really big hive, you put 2 in the top, 2 in the bottom. You leave them for 14 days. Take them off. You're required to leave them off for 14 days and let this chemical cycle out of the system before you put a honey super on to make table honey. If it's just if you're not pulling honey for table honey, and it's just going to be bee food, you can treat these anytime and not have to worry about them. But as far as making honey for your own personal use or to sell in the market, you can't put these honey boxes on until you've waited at least 14 days after pulling those mite strips out. There's a couple of other treatments. There's formic acid, there's oxalic acid. They're both natural treatments. They're considered organic, but they're a little harder on your bees. The formic acid has to be used in low temperatures, under 85 degrees for 14 to 21 days, depending on which product you're using, which application method. That's hard to find in South Texas. It's hard to get a stretch where there's 14 or 21 days with no temperature over 85 degrees. Why is that important? Well, they're hard on the bees. They're hard on the queens. If you're going to replace your queen anyway, which we recommend doing annually, or at least checking her if she starts to decline, you want super strong colonies. Young queens are going to provide you with a lot higher brood production. So when your queens start to age and decline, a lot of times the bees will ask the queen to step down. They'll have her lay special eggs in what's called supersedure cells. They look more like an emergency cell, which we'll talk about that more too. But the point is, as your queens age, they decline in brood production. Their egg laying abilities drop off, and to the point to where they may cause your colony to be a little bit weaker or not as strong as it could be. So we take them out and replace them. I like to consider doing that when I'm going to use a hard treatment, because if I'm doing something hard and it's hard on my queen, when the treatment's done, I may not have a mite load, but now I don't have as good of a queen. So I try to time those two together. Oxalic acid requires back-to-back treatments. It's not going to penetrate the capping of the brood cells. Where did I put my brood frame? The brood has got the cap. Like I said, when the egg gets to about 7 days, they cap it with a wax cap that's got some fiber in it that allows some air to come and go. So the formic acid, it's the only one that will penetrate that cap and kill the mites that are inside. What happens to mites, they know by the smell and the stage of the development of the bee which instar that bee is, and they know not to go in too early because they'll be detected and ejected by a bee, especially by some of the more advanced lines of Varroa sensitive hygienic bees. Those lines can detect and find infected mite infested pupa under cap cells. Most normal lines do not. They haven't developed that ability yet, but some lines do have that ability. The ones that don't, the mites are going to get in here right before they cap it so they can go undetected. And the first thing that happens when the female mite goes in here, she hides under that bee until it gets capped. And then once she feels safe, she's going to lay an egg. And the first egg she lays is a male bee, a male mite. And then every 30 hours or so, she's going to lay another egg. She's got 2 weeks now. Once they cap this, she's got 2 weeks. As I said, it's going to be a 21-day cycle, so she takes advantage of this. And the male bee, the drone, gets her an extra 3 or 4 days. So if she has that opportunity, she'll go into that cell, and she goes in there with a mindset of laying as many eggs as she can. So about every 30 hours, she lays another egg. Well, all these subsequent eggs are going to be female. The male is going to mate with all the sisters before they all hatch out, and then you're going to have some pregnant mites running around in your colony if this is allowed to happen. And this is the common life cycle of the Varroa mite. They come out on average at least 1.7 or whatever the averages are, that come out pregnant, ready to go get into another cell and repeat the same process. So they will double their population about every 10 to 12 days, in fact, is what the research says. Here's one of the problems. When your honeybees are going full blown in springtime and then the queen's raising a couple of thousand eggs a day, your colony brood production on a graph would look like a roller coaster going up, 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 up. And when in May, June comes along, it's going to kind of peak, and it's going to start to go back down and decline. And as your population drops off, because bees don't live that long, a worker bee is going to live approximately 21 days after it emerges as an adult. It goes through the cycles of, it's kind of like kids going through grade school. In fact, I use the analogy of a bee's day is much like a person's year. By the time when they hatch out, the first thing they do is one of their early job duties is kind of cleaning up in their cell and cleaning around there, getting some other cells ready for the queen to lay and polishing them and such as that. And then after they're a couple of days old, the older nurse bees will teach the young nurse bees how to feed the older larvae. They'll start to get to develop they eat protein, the pollen, and they can create what is called royal jelly, which is their version of mother's milk, and they'll start to feed the larvae. As they develop that, then they can feed the younger larvae. The older larvae are going to eat bee bread, which is more of a pre-mix of pollen and nectar, and it's got some bee enzymes in it that's going to help it keep it from fermenting and such. But anyway, the point is, those bees are only going to live in that little. They're kind of like elementary kids. I mean, that's the window when they're most productive in feeding those young larvae. Then they graduate. Next thing you know, they start to develop some other duties, like cleaning up the hive undertaker duty, taking out any dead bees. And they get to about 14 or 15 days old, they may start to become guard bees. And by the time they get about 18 days, they guard the entrance. They learn what their stinger's for, and they'll be on alert and red alert. If somebody comes, they put out a scent called the alarm pheromone. And after about 21 days, they get kind of like us as kids, 21 days old. We get booted out to go to work. Well, they become field bees, and they go out into the field and collect pollen and nectar. And in the prime time of the spring and early summer, they just basically wear themselves out after about 2 weeks of hard labor, maybe 3 weeks if they're, just depending on how much actually miles they're putting on, depending on availability of resources. In a drought season, they may not be flying as much, or they may be flying more further to go find resources that the scouts have located a few miles away instead of something close by. But they make multiple trips every day back and forth to the water yard, back and forth to the field to get pollen and nectar, etc. So they basically only live about 6 weeks as an adult bee that time of year. With that said, what happens is in March there's a boom of babies. It's an explosion of babies. So your colonies climbing in population numbers are extremely fast. Well, if you don't have a mite control thing going on, if your mites are in there breeding and doing that, they're going to grow right alongside them, population to population. Problem is, in June and July, when the summer comes and the flowers all dry up, the bees usually quit laying or quit raising as many young. So what you have is the roller coaster goes back down the hill for the bees, but the mites do not. They continue to breed and populate, so their numbers are going to escalate, and all of a sudden your ratio of mites to bees becomes a lot higher. The economic threshold for a safe level of mites in a honeybee colony is about 2 per 100 bees. 2 mites to 100 bees is where they draw the line in terms of you'll start to see a drop off in your honey production if you're a honey farmer and you have more than 2 mites per 100. The regular health of a hive is about 4 per 100. They used to say 6, and they've kind of decided that that's a little bit high. The science has. What we try to do is keep our numbers 2 or less. If I can do a mite wash and check them and they've got 1, I don't really get excited about treating that hive. When they get to 2, I want to treat them. I don't get all caught up in if it's 2 or 4 or 6 or whatever. If I've got more than 2, I know I need to put a treatment on there because those mites are going to start to populate and they grow really fast. So I'll put a treatment on them. And usually that treatment, whether it's a treatment like this, it takes 14 days to go. That's going to usually last about 6 weeks. An oxalic acid treatment, the oxalic acid, again, it doesn't penetrate the wax cappings on these closed cell or capped larvae or capped brood. So we have to treat with an oxalic acid about every 4 or 5 days. They used to say 7 days, but they're finding that that's really too far stretched apart. It gives too many time to hatch out. In fact, a lot of people don't even like to treat with oxalic acid when there's a lot of brood in the hive. It's not as effective. You can do it, you just have to be more diligent and treat more often. So what will happen is the babies will hatch out, you treat, and the ones that hatch out, you'll catch those, and just do it for about 3 or 4 times, and you should be able to get a clean mite wash. When I say a mite wash, we take this little device. There's multiple options for this. This is one of the devices we use. Put alcohol in here. It's got a line you put up. It's got a basket. You're going to catch a half a cup of bees. Just take a regular little measuring cup. We shake a frame of bees into a tub. Use a measuring cup and pour them in here. And you swirl this around for about a minute. By swirling it around, you're going to get all the bees shook up and wash the bees, basically, and the mites will die and they'll start to drop off the bees. And after about a minute, all of them are going to be off, and they'll drop through the holes in this basket. And as they go through those holes in the basket, the bees stay in here, and then you can pull this basket out and you can pour the alcohol off, and you can pour this out on a white paper towel, or you can probably just see them in this white plastic. And you can count how many mites you have. And again, if you have a half a cup is the equivalent of about 300 bees. A half a cup should have no more than 6 mites, or if you do the math and divide it out, 100 would be 2 mites per 100 or 6 per the 300. If you see more than that, now it's time to get a treatment on them. I check them about every 3 or 4 months, maybe sooner if I'm in an area that I think may be suspicious of having some mite bulbs. So doing your alcohol washes diligently is highly recommended. There's a sugar roll that people have started doing. They actually would, some people prefer to do that because it doesn't kill bees. It's not near as accurate. It's going to kill some bees anyway. It agitates them, and you don't get an accurate reading. There's the sticky boards. I do not rely on those. They're very complicated to do and get accurate numbers. You have to, I mean, as a beginner, you're probably not going to get the correct reading from those until you totally understand how many frames of bees you have and understanding what that means. I'll show you when you come out what it means, what a frame of bees officially is in terms of grading a hive. But if you don't know those things, it's very hard to rely on the sticky boards to give you a true understanding of how much your mite load is, because you're going to have mites that are dying every day, just like bees are dying every day. Mites die every day. You're going to have possible false readings. I'm not saying they don't work. I'm saying you have to understand them a little bit more than you do. This is a lot simpler test. Yes, it kills 300 bees, but like I said, the queens are laying 2,000 eggs a day. I think it's worth the sacrifice, 300 bees, and most experts agree that it's a very worthy sacrifice. That's what, a couple of hours worth of the queens working in one day, and you've got 300 bees. So you have to know which bees to get. You got to get them out of the brood nest. You can't get the field bees. You want the nurse bees, because those are the ones that are going to have the mites on them, because the mites want to be in the nest where the babies are being fed and raised. That's where they want to go and hide and lay their eggs. So the ones that are in the brood nest are the ones that are containing the mites that would give you your true readings. With that said, having a reliable mite treatment is only half the battle. Following up with another check to make sure your mite treatment was effective is the icing on the cake. You have to follow up if you want to make sure. You can usually tell your hive will stay a lot healthier and robust if you get a few hives, in a couple of years from now, you'll get to the point, if you neglect to treat them, you'll get to where you can recognize a weak colony from mites. Uh, you're probably going to start to experience some wax moth problems. I have a lot of people come to me wanting to buy bees and tells me that the wax moths got their last colony. Well, the wax moths are a secondary problem. They are the result of a weak colony. The wax moths are not going to take on a strong colony. They can't infest a strong enough colony. Almost all of your experts, when you ask a question about how do you fix this or fix that with a beehive, the first part of their answer is keep strong colonies, and then they'll elaborate based on the question some of the other things. But this mite wash things, they're like 20 bucks, 25 bucks. They come with a little instruction booklet. It's very simple to use, very quick. Like I said, Randy Oliver has a video. It shows you how to use this in about 4 minutes. Two of the minutes are talking about it. Get yourself one of these. We sell them. We have them. I'll have them in stock. Man Lake sells them if you can get them right now. It's very hard to get everything right now. Everybody's in the same boat. All supplies are in shorthand during the spring anyway, and now with the virus thing going on, everything is really back ordered and backlogged. But it's important to know that your mites are going to be your downfall of your honeybee hive if you're not doing something about it. I'd like